Welcome to Room Award, the podcast that explores the secrets of sleep and psychology. I'm your host, Ryan, and in each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of sleep and other topics such as mental well-being and personal growth. If you want to unlock your full potential and receive the rewards that come with understanding the power of sleep, you're in the right place. To discover more tips and insights on improving your sleep and overall well-being, visit our website and explore our other episodes at roomaward.org. Hey everyone, welcome back to Room Award. Today we're joined with Cara Weaver. She's the marketing and communication specialist of Wake Up Narcolepsy, with a degree in creative writing and English. Cara has a passion for helping others tell their story. Her own story with Wake Up Narcolepsy started shortly after she was diagnosed with Narcolepsy Type 2 in 2018 when she was a junior in high school. After being misdiagnosed and struggling for many years with the disorder, she decided to dedicate her time to raising awareness for narcolepsy and other sleep disorders. Using her background in social media marketing, Cara works to educate people about narcolepsy and provide resources to those who need it. Her work includes launching a TikTok channel which has helped to expand Wake Up Narcolepsy's online presence. She also wants rare disorders like narcolepsy to be better understood and for people who suffer from the disorder to know that they have support out there. Just for my first question, can you just share a brief overview of what narcolepsy is and how it affected your life and just individuals you know maybe?
Yeah, definitely. So, narcolepsy is basically a lifelong disorder of the central nervous system, and it's characterized by the brain's inability to control sleep-wake cycles. Um, in terms of how it's affected my life, I have narcolepsy type 2 myself. I was diagnosed in my junior year of high school, and I now also work for Wake Up Narcolepsy, which is a nonprofit that's dedicated to driving um, awareness, education, and research towards improved treatments and a cure for narcolepsy. So, my life is definitely kind of revolving around it, both from a personal standpoint and with the work that I do. Um, there are two types of narcolepsy. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is with cataplexy, and type 2 is without cataplexy. And cataplexy, just for some background, is a sudden and uncontrollable brief loss of muscle tone. And it can be triggered often by experiencing strong emotions. A lot of people have triggers that are like laughter, or certain foods can even be triggers. Um, I think I covered like the basics of that, but let me know if you want me to elaborate on anything.
Yeah, that was great. How does narcolepsy impact your daily life, especially maybe work or just getting around?
Yeah, it's definitely something that affects me more than I thought it was going to. When I always say I didn't take my diagnosis seriously until I started my work with Wake Up Narcolepsy, I kind of thought once I was diagnosed, I would go on medication and I would never have to think about it again. Um, but it is something that you deal with every day when you're somebody living with it. Um, I have it's different for everyone, but for me personally, I do best when I take scheduled naps during the day. So I take two naps, about 15 minutes is normally the best, which is a struggle because I like taking longer ones, but they're much more helpful when they're shorter. So having those is a really helpful part of managing it, and just keeping like a consistent sleep schedule, that sort of thing. I'm in a really lucky position because my work understands narcolepsy, and I also
Right.
work from home. So it's very easy for me to take naps. And, if I'm having a particularly rough day, I can let them know. Um, and something I struggle with is sleeping through alarms, just whether it's waking up, turning them off, not remembering that I did that, or, just not waking up to it. So there have been instances where I have been late to a meeting or something, and it's very infrequent when that happens, but it's nice working somewhere that understands it and doesn't hold that against me or take it as a sign of laziness or um, an issue with my work. But I'm very lucky because it's my first full-time job, so I can't really speak to what it's like having a full-time job that's not like this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like when you first personally experienced these symptoms, like how did you initially understand what was happening and how did you like maybe seek support and help?
Yeah, so my symptoms started probably in, I would say like eighth grade, maybe. So there was about 3 years before I was diagnosed, which is actually relatively short for narcolepsy because it's an average of like 7 years. Um, but I actually started experiencing the symptoms and specifically the excessive daytime sleepiness, um, and a lot of the brain fog and the cognitive issues, with like having problems with my memory and trouble concentrating. And I was misdiagnosed with depression. So I went through this like 3 year period where they would just keep switching my medication rather than switching my diagnosis. They were kind of set on, okay, she's depressed. How do
Yeah.
we fix it? And they weren't saying, like, maybe it's not depression. So I have just been on like every antidepressant and they kept changing that and just nothing was helping. Um, and I was just sleeping through. I mean, I would come home from school, sleep to till dinner, wake up, eat, try to do homework, and then fall back asleep, sleep through the night. Um, like sleeping was all I was doing.
Yeah.
At one point, I was in like medical half days. I wasn't going to school for, they thought it was anxiety and I couldn't be there all day. Um, so I didn't really understand my symptoms because I didn't see it as coming from a sleep issue. I just
Hmm.
thought, they tell you like with depression, you want to sleep a lot because you're just unmotivated. But I always say my biggest support was my mom. Uh,
Yeah.
I've always been very close with my mom and my sister, and I one of the hardest parts of it was that I was constantly like butting heads with my mom because she would ask me to do stuff and I'd forget, and then she was like, "Well,
Yeah.
why aren't you helping out?" And I was like, "Well, I literally don't remember you asking me to do that." Um, but she's the one who kept pushing to try to figure out what was going on, and she's the one who, we'd go to, I was seeing a psychiatrist and they'd be asking me questions, and I remember just being like, I don't know, like just not answering and just being very, because I was like numb at that point and I was just
Yeah.
low energy. And my mom, she tried so hard and she was just really pushing that along. And she's the reason that I got the diagnosis. And um, eventually my psychiatrist was like, "Have we talked about sleep studies?" And then after I took the sleep study, it was all figured out. Um, but so definitely support just in the people around me. It was like the biggest part of it.
Yeah. That's super interesting. And going along that, like when you felt those like tired symptoms interfering with your daily life, like were there some ways you tried to cope with it? And like, are there any strategies that might resonate with students facing like general fatigue or burnout?
Yeah, I think um, I always say that I didn't realize there was something wrong for a long time because I was saying how tired I was, and everyone was like, "Me too, like I'm tired," and everyone
Yeah.
talks about it all the time. Um, and there's this like collective suffering at school where just everyone's tired and everything. And obviously, in my case, there was something else going on, but
Right.
I think just even though that's so normalized, I think really prioritizing rest is really
Hmm.
important. And especially when it comes to, I mean, I was the type that would study nonstop for a test because I thought that was the way to go. And I would just, I always wanted to do better and just, but I think really listening to your body. And I know I get really sick when I get stressed. So around exams and that sort of thing, I would get really sick. And that was my body telling me, okay, you need to slow down. And I think that that's something that not just people with narcolepsy can learn from, but just students in general. Like you have to rest. It is a necessity as much as it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say definitely that, and just holding each other accountable always helps with that. Um, kind of, if it's a rough time for everyone, kind of saying like, "Have you taken a break recently?" And like, go do something together. And it sounds like such simple advice, but it really does help. In terms of specific like symptoms and like me coping
Hmm.
with it, I found that, and this was more after my diagnosis when I kind of understood it a little bit better, but getting up, taking a walk, to stay awake, I found that like drawing, like just like doodling while I'm trying to focus on something actually really helps me focus, and keeps me awake. And drinking water, having something to eat, those sorts of
Okay.
things. They seem again really small, but they can help a lot.
Mhm. Yeah. So those are like super interesting, and like having other people to like lean on is really helpful.
Yeah.
Um, and I know you mentioned it's like your first year, like full-time job. Like, is there any advice, like you've maybe gone through the experience of like disclosing a condition you have at your workplace, and like and what accommodations might be helpful for that? Like if you had to like tell someone, like how would you say that to them and stuff?
Yeah, definitely. And we have specific resources through Wake Up Narcolepsy, actually for disclosing diagnosis, that I'll definitely share with you. That we have a letter that has some like reasonable accommodations and kind of how to go about it. Um, we always say like they can't help you if you don't disclose. It is your choice. You don't have to, but in order to get those accommodations and sort of be supported, you do have to disclose.
Hmm.
But I mean, some accommodations, they can be flexible work schedules, or flexible in a sense of maybe the start and end times vary, but also flexible in a sense of working from home, hybrid, like that sort of thing. Um, Another one I know of is offering a like safe space to nap. Because again, like I said, like I'm lucky because I can just do it at home, but I know there's people that if I was in an office setting, I take 2 naps a day. Where am I going to do that? So a lot of
Yeah.
times they'll have a space that is reserved for like a wellness room, or for nursing mothers, something like that, that often they'll be able to also utilize for people with narcolepsy. Um, and I think just kind of figuring out what works for you. There are some specific examples like I just gave, but ultimately it's up to like what you need.
Right.
But I would definitely recommend checking out like the resources on advocating for yourself, because
Mhm.
you want to know your rights, and you want to know what you're asking for before going into something like that.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Mhm.
And how can like friends, family, and peers be supportive of someone with narcolepsy, or maybe someone who just generally has burnout really often?
Yeah, I think I would say that one of the biggest things with narcolepsy is just listening to people. Um, it's it's hard. Every time I speak about narcolepsy, I always say this a million times, but it's just so different for everyone that even if you know one person with narcolepsy and you know how they experience it, you may meet someone who experiences it completely differently. So never assuming that you know what someone's going through, I think is really important, and listening when they tell you, um, because there's so much misunderstanding around narcolepsy, and there's so much misinformation in the media of what it looks like. It's not. I,
Yeah.
I it's like when I got diagnosed, I was like, okay, well, I've never fallen asleep in the middle of my sentence, so I can't have narcolepsy, because that's what we
Yeah.
think it is. Um, so I think kind of overcoming those like stereotypes and trying to listen to them and relearn what narcolepsy is, or learn if you didn't know anything about it, and educating yourself really helps. I know that I really appreciate when the people around me do their own research on narcolepsy, because it kind of takes that burden off me of educating them.
Right.
Um, and yeah, just like I said, just listening. And also I think specifically with peers, it can be really hard. I know I mentioned earlier, like with like everyone's tired.
Hmm.
Um, And it's funny, people will say to me all the time, they'll be like, I'm tired, and then they'll be like, oh, I'm sorry. And I'm like, no, you're allowed to be tired. Like it's not offensive to me. But I think we people do have a tendency of, if someone is confiding in you about their narcolepsy, I think it, it's better to not try to act like you completely understand it. I think
Hmm.
understanding that you don't understand is a big part of it. Like saying that that must be really hard for you. Sometimes hearing that is better than trying to relate in ways that aren't actually like I
Yeah,
don't
no,
know.
I
I
get
always
what you
say
mean.
like, yeah, it's like our narcolepsy tired is not the same as regular tired, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And I know you mentioned like stereotypes and misunderstandings, but like for in your experience, like what are the most common like misconceptions that like people have like said to you about narcolepsy that like have they been like, oh, but you don't like, yeah, sleep in the middle of your sentence. Like what if something stuff you've heard?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the first people I told was just like a friend in high school, and I remember saying, I have narcolepsy, and he just went, no, you don't. And I was like, I don't know how to respond to that. Like,
Yeah.
and it was because, and then, we had a further conversation, and it was because he was like under the impression that narcolepsy was just falling asleep all the time. And I had never done that, at least in front of him. But I also like, I, I think the only time I think I could probably count on like one hand the amount of times I've actually like fallen asleep without warning. And I still most of the time have some sort of warning.
Yeah.
Um, I always say it's more so that it comes on very strong and I'm like, okay, I need to go take a nap. It's
Right.
not like I'm interacting with someone and I just fall asleep. I have warning with it and it's more so just I'm very, very tired right now. Um, so yeah, I mean there's that. A lot of people do say like the most common thing is like, oh, so you just fall asleep all the time? That's just how people react to that. To the point where I've started when I disclose to people, I say, I have narcolepsy, but it's not what you think, like
Yeah.
automatically,
Yeah.
because I just like don't even, and it's not the people's fault. Like before I was diagnosed, I remember, I don't know if you've ever seen the Nickelodeon show Victorious,
Yeah.
but there's an episode. Do you know what I'm talking about with with the
Yeah, I think so. Like
narcolepsy
where
thing?
they fall asleep constantly.
Yeah, they did like a episode where the main character was like playing a person with narcolepsy and just would fall asleep like mid-sentence.
Hmm.
And like they like refer to themselves as like a sleepy loser. It's like really bad looking back. But that was my only like reference point. So when they said I
Right.
had narcolepsy, I was like, I definitely don't. And it's just things like that. And I mean, it's still out there in the media. There was a joke about narcolepsy in the most recent Haunted Mansion movie, like the one that like just came out. Like they're
Hmm.
still making jokes about it, and it's just it's very frustrating because that's just not what narcolepsy is. And um, yeah, I think that's definitely the biggest like misconception with it.
Right. And I know you mentioned saying like you say narcolepsy is not what you think it is. Are there any other ways like you educated people around you of narcolepsy, or like is there any advice you would give to students who also have narcolepsy and they're trying to like say that to their friends or their social circles?
Yeah, I think I always recommend using resources that are out there. Because I know that I felt like I had to educate everybody.
Hmm.
So being able to just pull up like Wake Up Narcolepsy has Narcolepsy 101 or like a series called What Does That Mean? And it's all about like terms associated with narcolepsy. And being able to pull those up when I'm explaining it to people or being able to send those to people, it takes the burden off of me. Um, because I'm not I don't have a science background. I don't
Yeah.
have so being able to just kind of pass it along and say, interpret this how you will, but here's kind of the information and then have the discussion with them of this is how I experience it because that's a big part of it is again, it's different for everyone. So just being able to have that conversation, um, But I think just raising awareness for just what it is a huge part of it. So just talking about it, and I'm very open about
Right.
my narcolepsy, mostly because it's my job, but
Yeah.
I I am always talking about it, and I never want people to be like afraid to ask me questions, and I think that's another part of it is some people are really scared they're going to offend you, and I don't I really don't get offended if people are like, "Oh, I thought it was because like I thought people fell asleep all the time," because most people do, and it's not their fault that they think that. So just being willing to kind of answer questions is also a big part of it. Um,
Right.
when you're educating other people, and in terms of social circles, I I think you can tell a lot about somebody based on how they react to something like this. So I you can kind of tell if the person is a good friend or not if they're
Yeah.
automatically willing to listen versus, like I said, the like snap judgments aren't really like everyone kind of has those. So that's different. But if someone's consistently like not willing to listen to you, or doesn't want to hear you out about certain things and how they can support you, I think that says a lot about that person. And it's
Yeah.
not necessarily, I know it might be like, it might be hard, but it might not be worth continuing to try to educate them versus just stepping away from them.
Yeah. Right. And I think just like switching gears here, like how can someone or how is your experience with narcolepsy and like how do you make the most of your sleep or like optimize it overall? I know you mentioned like having a routine, but like is there anything else you do to like make the most of it?
Yeah, the routine was a really hard thing for me. I pushed back so hard on that. They tell everyone, even people without narcolepsy, like
Yeah.
going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time. I pushed back really, really hard on that because I didn't want to give myself a bedtime. And I will say that now that I do actually have a consistent routine, it does help for sure.
Yeah.
But I think I'm also in a position now where I can versus in college. Like now I have a work schedule that's the
Right.
same. So in college, I wasn't really good about it. Would it have helped me? Probably. But I think there are some things that, I was willing to deal with the extra tired and not have the sleep schedule. Um, but yeah, I think that sort of thing. And then also just realizing what your ideal sleeping conditions are. I know they always say like a dark room with
Yeah.
like colder, those like certain things like that. But what works best for you. So I personally like having still dark, but having the TV on at a very, very low volume.
Mm.
Um, because it actually will sometimes snap me out of I know we haven't really talked about this, but sleep paralysis and hallucinations. The hip I always mix these up. It's hypnopompic and hypnagogic, I think. I
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
quote me on that, but there's so it's when you're falling asleep and when you're waking up.
Hmm.
Um, and those are often kind of tied to sleep paralysis. Um, and having something like the TV on will often kind of snap me out of it because it grounds me and it brings me back to reality. Um, so like I don't know, I've had everyone for a very long time telling me that, you shouldn't sleep with the TV on and you shouldn't, like all these things. But I think really figuring out what works for you
Right.
is is a big part of it. Um,
Yeah.
I was trying to think if I had anything else about like sleep specifically, but I think that's
Okay. And yeah, maybe can you just talk a little bit about what sleep paralysis is for maybe like some people who don't know?
yeah. So sleep paralysis is the temporary like inability to move. Basically when you sleep and your body is in a state of paralysis because you're not acting out your dreams, that sort of
Yeah.
thing. So when you wake up with sleep paralysis, your body is still in that state, but you're awake. So you can't move, you can't talk. And it can be a very scary experience. And it's in narcolepsy, it often goes along with these hallucinations.
Hmm.
I would have really bad ones when they're worse when you're sleep deprived, but I would have them when I didn't get a lot of sleep and then I tried to take a nap. Um, and it's basically it's multi-sensory experiences that are just very vivid. Um, and that also has to do with aspects of REM sleep coming into
Yeah.
wakefulness for yeah. And so I think it's almost like I always called them actually before I knew what they were called, I called them sleep panic attacks because that's essentially what they feel like. It's like a living nightmare, it feels very, very real and you can't move. So something like the TV to ground me, or if I was napping on the couch and like my mom was in the room, something like that
Right.
can sometimes snap you out of it.
Okay. Yeah, super interesting. Thanks. Um, and like just another question. In terms of like research and awareness, like where do you see the field of narcolepsy heading in the next few years? Like, do you see that there's gonna be more awareness and like less misunderstanding towards it, or where do you see this going?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a really exciting time. I think there's a lot of focus on sleep disorders in research and in awareness as well. I think, we're always looking to raise more awareness. Like it's never done. It's constantly moving. But I mean, we were just reflecting on this year is Wake Up Narcolepsy's 15th anniversary. And our executive director is one of the co-founders. And even just in conversations with her about how different it was when they started it, 15 years ago, um, and to be able to see that sort of change. I haven't been in the space long enough that I've actually seen that
Hmm.
much of a change, but I'm really excited for how it can keep growing. It's better than it was, and I hope that it just keeps getting better. And I think there's a lot of exciting research out there. Um, and we're always, I mean, part of Wake Up Narcolepsy's mission statement is that driving research towards a cure. So we're always hoping to eventually get there. But just improve treatments, more, and the more people know about it, the more the stigmas will change, but also people that are undiagnosed. We want to reach people that can say, "Oh, I'm having these issues. Maybe I need to get tested. Maybe I need to go take a sleep study." And we want people to be able to recognize the symptoms in other people. So just raising awareness for that cause as well is a really big part of it.
Yeah. Okay. I just have like two final questions. My first one is like, what is like one thing you want our audience of like a younger audience to take away in like maybe terms of narcolepsy, sleep, or just anything you would want to say?
I
Like if there's
think,
like anything you have to say or like something you want
yeah,
them to take away, like what would you want them to know?
I know I'm trying to think. I mean, well, we already covered because, well, my initial response would be that narcolepsy isn't what you think it is.
Right, yeah.
But we already kind of covered that. And I think another thing that I've already touched on is just how important rest is.
Hmm.
But I think that, yeah, I would say that sleep is not optional and it's not always given the respect that it deserves. And I think that we we really need to be having these more open conversations about sleep. Um, but also just on a wider scale, I think that listening to your body is really important. And I always say that on if something doesn't feel right, if in high school, like I said, I was saying I'm so tired and people were saying they were tired. So I was like, well, how are they doing so well? Because
Right.
I assumed, we're feeling the same amount of tired. So I was like, how are they doing so well? But I wish I could go back and tell myself, like, no, you're like, hold on to that. You're tired. Tell more people, tell the doctor,
Yeah.
and I feel like just looking at these things seriously and taking sleep seriously and realizing how much of our life it affects is something that's really important.
Right. Well, I think that's all I had for today. I really appreciate your time for coming on, and I'll definitely link like everything you mentioned, all the resources from like Wake Up Narcolepsy and everything you mentioned. And I think that's all I had. Thanks so much.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the Reward podcast. Before you go, we'd appreciate your support by subscribing, liking, and leaving your thoughts in the comments. Stay tuned for our next podcast, where we will be joined by a special guest speaker to explore even more about the fascinating world of sleep and psychology.